This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, true seekers and true crime junkies. Welcome back to another episode of Hit the Road Jack, Finding the Zodiac. I would like to welcome to the show today Nolan Del Campo.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. So I had something I was going to start out with that I thought was fairly interesting, and it kind of takes me back to some of the cases that I've had up against government examiners. And the reason why I mention this is because we've had the handwriting of Jack Tarrant looked at by the FBI. And in doing so, it took, I felt like it was about 10 months or so. I know Dennis and I kept asking, what's the results? What's the results? They kept giving us excuses like there was some terrorist, handwritings that they were having to work with, and that they really didn't have enough examiners. And then they found an examiner to do it. But then the agent, Chris Hopkins, had indicated that the agent that was looking at the handwriting had gone above and beyond and done things that he says he wasn't authorized to do, and made it sound like he's a newbie. He didn't know what he was doing. He got overly excited about something, and they squashed it and took it away from him. And that didn't make any sense to me.
No, just an opinion.
Right.
It's not fact or it's false. It's not right or wrong. It's an opinion.
I feel like if this is real and they did legitimately give it to this guy who was the underling of the document examiner in Quantico, because that's where they said they sent the handwriting back to, is that I felt like the way he stated it to me is that this guy probably found out or identified exactly what I did, which was Jack was the author of these writings.
His findings did not coincide with what they wanted him to find.
Exactly. And so Chris Hopkins had indicated that because he had gone above and beyond. Well, what's that mean? What's above and beyond mean? He was thorough, exactly. And he came to some conclusion that I obviously was never going to see that an opinion of. So literally he said, then they turned it back over to the head person. And I think that was a female document examiner. And so we waited another, couple months. And then finally, on one of our visits into the FBI office, we were presented with an opinion letter from them. And it literally was like one page and then one paragraph on the second page. And in it, it said, Jack may have written the Zodiac letters. Jack may not have written the Zodiac letters. I was like, what the hell does that mean?
If he may have, then it implies he may not have. You don't have to say he may not have. You always say he may have. That's inconclusive either way.
And that's what's bringing me to the point of what we're going to talk about right now, is this inconclusive decision making that occurs on the document examiners that are retired from government or law enforcement. I'm going to have this clip played real quick, and then I will come back and explain afterwards. So let's see, to be or not to be. Oh, I can't laugh. My rib. Anyways, let's go ahead and play that video really quick, and then we'll get that out of the way, and then I'll continue on with what I have to say.
I asked them to identify to me what is an approved laboratory. They didn't. What percentage of cases are you able to make a positive identification of handwriting? Now, you'll find in many cases, a lot of times, particularly with the government, they give very large number of inconclusives. In fact, it's interesting to watch when someone who's worked for the government for a number of years goes into private practice, they start giving inconclusives, and they find out very quickly that that is not acceptable. And so they start giving opinions. And what percentage of cases have you been?
Okay, so that is one of the mentors that I have in handwriting. She is in her 80s. She's been doing handwriting for decades. 40 some years, I'm probably putting on that, maybe even longer. But to hear those words in one of the classes that I was taking with her, just about kind of, it's like a validation type factor, where it's something that going through these court processes up against these different document examiners. That, well, my thought is always they're either a hired gun or they're just not well trained to come back with the opinions that they've come back with. But to hear her say that they come back with these inconclusives as a way to stay in the case and make money rather than to actively be able to identify or eliminate somebody from handwriting is an injustice to the business. And when they show up in the courtroom, they have 30-year CVs of working for law enforcement or the Department of Justice or the government, and the court somehow holds them to some higher regard than they do private practice. It's taken a long time for me to be able to overcome some of these individuals' opinions, but that means that I have to work extra hard to explain to the court and to show the court how handwriting works. And so that takes us back to this inconclusive that they did on Jack's handwriting. I knew it the entire time. A good document examiner is going to be able to make an identification, or should be able to, or exclusion of an individual.
Or at least cite similarities and differences and give facts that back up what they're opining.
Correct. I want to say in one of the last cases that I went up against a government document examiner, the court did not find for me because they said that I didn't talk about similarities. I only talked about dissimilarities. Well, it was a forgery. There was no similarities. I get lost sometimes in the thinking of these judges that want to take it upon themselves to say, oh, that looks similar. No, in your layperson's mind, you think that looks similar, but I'm going to show you how it's different because it is a forgery. If it was similar, we'd be talking about an identification instead. At any rate, taking us back to Jack's handwriting and the inconclusive, I just want people to understand that regardless of what the FBI came back with, and I don't even believe that opinion letter was written by a document examiner. Again, it did not satisfy the criteria for writing or extending an opinion in a case, especially as short as it was. I mean, a minimum of three. My opinion letter is a minimum of 3 pages. We have to describe the documents that we used, both questioned, which would have been the Zodiacs, and Jack's, which I had more than 165 examples of Jack's handwriting, both cursive, printed, lowercase, uppercase. I had everything. I had diagrams. I had drawings. I had, schematics for his engineering. I had so many pieces of evidence. They didn't even identify but 2 pieces of his handwriting in that particular letter. I would have listed all of them.
Just a summary by one of the agents working on it. It probably wasn't even from the handwriting analyst.
That's what I felt. And, of course, we can only, theorize that it was kind of just to placate Dennis and I rather than a legitimate examination that had been done. And we're going to be talking about handwriting today, hopefully, if we get to it, on the Lawrence K. Klein, who they call on the internet Lawrence Kane. And again, I still can't figure out where they adopted this name Kane, other than they found the word Kane, they believed, in the 340 cipher and want to now form fit that to Lawrence K. And it's Kaye. So now they've changed it to he's Kane, Kane. But all his documentation that we're going to look at is showing that he is K, not Kane.
Who's saying Kane? The FBI?
And well, different sources on the internet. So but
it's Kaye.
Right. And I'll show you how that all comes about. But so I wanted to just kind of cover that and let everybody know that it is a running theme in the private industry, in the private sector, that government document examiners government trained, they're in forensics, trained in all kinds of forensics. The likelihood that they have taken any cases for elderly people, because they are probably the least likely person to commit a crime, right? These people are handling criminal issues. You don't really have 85-year-olds with dementia out there committing crimes, so they never get to see this type of handwriting. So I just think sometimes that they haven't seen enough, but they rely on their 30-year CV to get themselves by, and hopefully that the judges believe them on that. So we are back at, I just got a couple more slides left on John Mark Karr, which is really just the breakdown of the emails between Michael Tracy and John Mark Karr. Once again, we have an individual reaching out, like I said, to an editor or a journalist. We still have this media web of people working with the media, and this was just something that the Zodiac did. So to know John Mark Karr was also facilitating emails back and forth, making claims that he had committed crimes or that he had done other things, really takes me aback. What's that?
Real quick, I missed last week, so I have a couple quick questions. So yeah. Karr allegedly confessed. Who did he confess to?
The Thailand police.
Okay. But did he do any confession once he got back to the States? Or
well, they extradited him from Thailand back to Los Angeles. There, I don't know why they extradited him back there.
Why not Denver?
Right. Why not Boulder, Colorado, where he committed admitted to committing this crime? So he goes to LA first, then he's extradited back to Boulder, Colorado. They find that he doesn't match DNA, he doesn't match handwriting, he doesn't match anything associated with the case, but he had enough inside knowledge that wasn't known to the public that caused them to fly all the way over to, Europe, grab him and bring him freaking back. So it tells me he knew more. And now these days, when you're looking at stuff on the internet about him, it says, oh, he didn't know anything more than what was out there in the public. We give people free rides back from Europe who aren't giving us any inside information that only the killer would know. No, that's just not the way things work.
And I think is in our theory also that if there were outside people, which we think it is, then there's more than one person involved.
Right. And so he was excluded as the possible killer. So all of this was all made up, obviously. But if you followed along, I think we talked about on one of the shows you were on, is that he left out from Sonoma under charges and hopped countries, starting in Malaysia, then ending up in Thailand, and then ultimately whether he walked himself into the Thailand police and claimed that he had killed JonBenet Ramsey with enough information that made our law enforcement take him seriously and go out there and get him, or he was legitimately tracked down by Michael Tracy through these emails and found at the school that he was currently working at, and they arrested him there. I still can't tell the truth because, again, everything on the internet, I sometimes I like to say, oh, the media said this, but I have to remember, I don't believe the media.
Yeah. And he's a fugitive. How can he travel all these places? I mean, he was still awaiting trial for child porn, right?
Exactly. So once he gets excluded as the possible suspect in JonBenet Ramsey, he's then extradited back to California, to Sonoma County, to face the charges for the pedophilia that he ran away from. And it turned out that the judge admonished the DA for having lost the computer that had the child porn on it.
The images were on? Oh, God.
We're only talking like 4 years, 5 years this man's been gone, and you've already lost the evidence in which you were going to prosecute him over. So he is ultimately acquitted on those charges and set free.
Wow.
That to me sounds like what he did by leaving the country, pretending and playing Zodiac, pretending and playing he's JonBenet Ramsey's killer. That was all a setup, and he was he was going to be given the right to get off of all of these charges once he got back after Jack had died. That's kind of the way I felt, because it was within days of Jack dying that he turns himself in and flies back.
Yeah, he was a pawn in a bigger game.
I think so. And we're going to look at some of these letters too. So the last thing that I had on here are some Jack Terrence similarities from the emails. It has the concern for what family and children will think of him on page 86 of the email. That is a direct statement that Jack told Dennis Kaufman to hold off on writing the book. He didn't care what everybody else thought. He just cared about what the people he knew thought about him. So he wanted to wait until he passed away before Dennis would write his book. On page 331, it says, made a statement, knows someone who was crazy about Asian women. We know that Jack had an affinity for Asian women, and he was very upset with the military removing and taking him back out of Japan after he had met somebody that he had fallen in love with, a Japanese woman. On page 334, it said, my father would kill anyone who screwed him in business. Now, remember that this is supposed to be words coming out of John Mark Karr, but we know that Jack Terrence's father actually took Jack with him. I think Jack was supposedly 5 or be somewhere between 5 and 8 years old, and he took him to a man's house that had failed to pay back or give back bottles, which they were using during Prohibition. Those were like gold back in that day. Owed him money and then didn't return the bottles for the liquor. And Jack's dad shot the man in his face right in front of Jack. So Jack had watched his father kill somebody.
Wow,
so
in the family.
By his own, yeah, he got it honest, right? You don't like somebody, you're mad at somebody, you just kill them. Doesn't matter. Let's see, reference to, so in these emails, we kept seeing reference to mails. They kept like regular mail, like mailing a letter. He kept referring to mails, which is kind of an old age term for an email. If you started using email, you knew that what it was called was an email. But here he is using emails, but he keeps calling them mails. Yeah. It just seems like something like Jack in the, being older in the techno world would continue saying, mails versus emails. The timing of the communications and their similarities, there was 4 years of communications previous to May 2006. I believe that would put us back to 2002. We have a letter to Tom Voigt in 2002, and then in 2003 again. And these seem to also follow the path and pattern of John Mark Karr, because when he initially left, he ended up in Malaysia based on his own statements in these emails. We have the first letter to Tom Voigt out of Malaysia, and then he moves on to Thailand, and we have the next letter to Tom Voigt out of Thailand. So I'm not sure if we're going to call that coincidental. And there was a white substance in it too, so it was almost meant to imitate the anthrax mailings.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he references constantly assure, which is cut and pasted into Tim's letter. So the finale letter to Tim Miller has the word assure in it. So we keep seeing this word that is used. On page 316, he uses the 20.30 for a time reference, as if in military time. John Mark Karr, to my knowledge, was not military. We know definitely Jack was. And we know that the Zodiac references it. There was references in the snow that were occurring in the emails as well. That, to me, took me back to the Oakland County child killer. So the research items that I had up here was the word knickers. Is that a European reference? Do you know?
I think it comes from Great Britain, but East Coast, like the Knickerbockers, that's the Knicks' original name.
Gotcha. Yeah, I had that down there because I didn't know where that derived from.
Like stockings or socks or something like that.
Really? I thought knickers were like I don't know. Yeah, so that was and then there was a couple people. I'm not sure if you're even familiar with any of these names. I did kind of figure out a couple of them, but somebody named Mick Sandrock, Michael Helgoff, called him the Boot Man, Gary Olivia. Let's see, Paces Ferry in your neighborhood, Charles Dodgson, he called a hero, and then Norman Mailer. I did not know who Norman Mailer was. So
he's
there's
a famous author.
Oh, okay. Then that at least
really famous and pretty liberal progressive, but he did like The Executioner's Song is one of his famous books, and many others.
Okay, so The Executioner, I think, was one of the themed things that played out in one of the Zodiac communications, right? There were a couple, Peppermint and Pompet. I thought there was something that maybe that's why I pulled that up, is the reference to The Executioner. I did not know that Norman Mailer was responsible.
This guy was a guy in the Midwest, I think, or more west than middle, that got convicted of murder and was the first person in a long time in that particular state that they put to death. Hence the book.
And Norman wrote about it, or Norman was the one that
wrote the book, the definitive book on it. Yeah.
Oh, all right. So that
was one in a long line of of famous books that he's written. He's a famous writer.
Well, then that puts it back into the Zodiac realm for two reasons. One, we're having references to books, which references to books, movies, and media was something that the Zodiac did consistently and constantly. And then the executioner, which I believe that there is a reference. One of the communications that the Zodiac sent had been identified as being something from something that was related to the executioners. So
Norman Mailer also too was a friend of Dorothy Kilgallen's, the journalist from back east that got murdered.
Oh, and that was she was related to the JFK stuff.
Yeah, she was the one that interviewed Jack Ruby while he was on trial.
Okay,
And she was going to do a book on the JFK assassination. And Mailer was suspicious after she died because they deemed her death accidental overdose. But most smart people think she was murdered.
Well, and what do we have? The accidental overdose with Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, which he was friends with Marilyn Monroe. We've seen it happen a couple times, and it just makes me wonder when they don't like you anymore, what they're willing to go through to get you out of their way.
Yeah.
Well, here's those communications that I was talking about from Tom Voigt. And the reason I bring these in, and there are a lot of consistencies with some of the writing with Jack. There is obviously some differences, but we know that the Zodiac had many different writing styles in his arsenal. Jack also had many different writing styles. The way I stumbled upon these was unbeknownst to Dennis, who really was on his outs with Tom Voigt at the time. And I found these letters on Tom Voigt's site by going through the Wayback Machine and pulling them off, because he had already shut down his AOL site at that point and tried to dump everything that was there. And when I was holding these letters, I waited until Charles, which is the youngest son of Jack, to leave the room. He was back there in my office with Dennis and I, and he wanted a soda. So I sent him out to get a soda. And I took that opportunity to show these letters to Dennis because I believed that there was a possibility, and I wanted to examine them, that these could have also come from the Zodiac, which I believed was Jack. And so I was not trying at this point in time, everybody has to understand Charles wasn't really on the bandwagon with Dennis. And it really hurt him to hear that, some of these things that Dennis was accusing his dad of doing. And so we would talk about different crime sprees and different things, but out of the presence of Charles. And that's why I waited for him to walk out of the room. And when he came back into the room, I was holding the paper discussing it, one of the letters to Tom Voigt, discussing that with Dennis. And he looked over my shoulder and his response was, "Where did you get my dad's handwriting?" I about hit the floor.
So he recognized. Yeah.
He recognized it.
Voigt letter. Interesting.
Yeah, and I know that the DA here in Sacramento County will use family members, because who's better of an expert at whether or not it's your handwriting than your own family members who you live with and are around all the time. Wow. So they don't even pay half the time for a document examiner. They'll just call one of your family members to the stand. "Do you recognize this handwriting?" "Yep, that's my brother's." Busted, right? Yeah. So to me, that was very, very telling that he looked at this handwriting and automatically suspected that it was his dad's. Now we can see up here in the top left-hand corner, this is the first 2002 letter that came in, and the taxi cab stamp. I saw that as a dead giveaway for the Paul Stein. That was a direct link back.
Interesting, yeah.
Just like the historic trolley stamp with the businessman and the attaché on one side and the Navy men hanging out the other side of the trolley, that historic stamp was used in one of the mailings for D.B. Cooper. It's like and the stamps are obviously very important to the Zodiac. We've seen that throughout.
Yeah. Well, he likes to and tease.
Yeah.
And that's one way of doing it.
And how many people are like literally going to try and pawn off a crime on the Zodiac, at any given point in time? It seems to make more sense that the Zodiac is trying to connect himself to these things versus somebody going, "Oh, I'm going to pawn this off on the Zodiac." That just seems so ridiculous. So this one actually came out of Singapore, which is Malaysia. So here we have where he ended up, where John Mark Karr ended up first. And of course, the 2002 letter also included fingerprints, but we can see that they're partials and they're actually the joints They did not give the actual tips of the finger of the fingers at all. And that's telling. I'm going to give you partials, but not everything you need to make an identification. Right. It also included DNA based on the letter itself, stating the DNA was in there, and a white chemical substance that I believed was to mimic the anthrax mailings, which tied it back to the anthrax mailings. Now, I understand, again, that while somebody may not try to attach themselves to other crimes, because heaven forbid you actually got caught and you just, identified with having committed crimes you didn't commit, if they catch you, you're going to go down for all of it. So I just don't see somebody doing that. And at the same time, in this letter stating that they sent fingerprints, DNA, and to have Tom Voigt say, oh, this didn't come from the Zodiac. Well, who the heck would send you fingerprints and DNA if they knew that all you had to do was test it to determine they were just liars? Right?
Right.
I tend to believe that they haven't given us the truth about this DNA or these fingerprints, because nobody, again, why would I waste my time sending you something to test if it was only going to come back to exculpate you, and now you just look like a fool and somebody who's trying to, claim fame for something you didn't do? It seriously doesn't make any sense. And the other part of these letters are not only describing what the Zodiac was going through at the time, heavy drug use, these states of hypnosis, basically, that he was working with underground, type media people. He called it a perverted system. Some of these words that we're going to get to, when I read these letters to you, you'll think like, oh my goodness. And these are the letters where he says, who's going to play me in the movies? You want my story because it's going to be the best there is. You're going to tell the truth if you adopt what I have to say, kind of thing. Second letter, actually, you can see in the postage stamp here, it was mailed out of Thailand, which is exactly where John Mark Karr ended up. So I think that these were shipped to John Mark Karr, and John Mark Karr then turned around and mailed them legitimately out of these two particular areas, attempting to make it look like the Zodiac was no longer in the United States. And if you think about it, this is 2001. Why are they trying to make it look like he's out of the United States in 2001, unless all of the little buzzes that you were hearing about the anthrax mailings that the Zodiac wrote them, they were trying to bifurcate. Zodiac wasn't even in the United States when those letters were mailed. But I remember back in 2001, after the planes hit and then the anthrax mailings were done, I would hear people on the street saying the Zodiac wrote that. I'm like, you guys are ridiculous. That man's, that's like 40 years old and he was a serial killer. Like, why would he be out here mailing out anthrax right now? Because it's all part of an interconnected group of workings under politics, under government, under mob, under media. It's all one big ball together.
Wild.
Right? So here is an analysis done on those same emails. Now, this is not me saying this. This is another individual who also read all 400 pages of the emails. And it started out saying, yeah, I didn't buy him not having any knowledge or ability to follow this case. This case undoubtedly made worldwide news. He's talking about JonBenet Ramsey. I do see a constructive difference where the emails take a turn in personality and construction for sure. I also note that at times Michael Tracy's words were eerily similar to those of Z. And when I see your confusion with who might have said it, it's because it is so reminiscent of what we expect to hear from Z that even I had to reread to determine who said it. Karr seems to have the same whiny words in many of his emails that appear extremely redundant, and that may be due to the lack of new info, and he was trying to keep the conversation going until he gets some important info that must be conveyed, and then the emails take on a whole new agenda and overtone. He is basically attempting to point to pedophilia and asphyxia, which makes me think we are looking where he wants us to instead of the real place. And then there is a push for the book for recognition. And that push for the book is no different than the push that we saw in the Zodiac or in the letters to Tom Voigt, that push for movies. So in these emails, he's pushing for a book to be written about him. He's basically attempting to, two completely separate agendas. I lean on the book being the ultimate motive, and where else do you see an uncaught killer attempting to make contact with anyone to get a book or movie deal made other than the Zodiac killer? You don't see that anywhere else. Karr was definitely a patsy, and I wonder if this was initiated with Dennis Kaufman's revelations to a majority of law enforcement in 2000 and 2001. It is all very timely, and I note location, location, location. Sonoma County, of all places, is where they find this pedophile. Sonoma County supposedly can't get San Francisco Police Department to do a match on Jack Terrence's palm print that Dennis Kaufman gave him. And there are unsolved murders in this jurisdiction from Z as well, in my honest opinion. I believe that John Mark Karr created all the chapter names, but there are many missing parts to these emails. The response that he is familiar with criminal profilers is a direct statement found in Zodiac, Scorpion letters to John Walsh, John Benet Ramsey, Black Dahlia, and I'm sure more that I haven't thought of just yet. Many words like heavens and paradise and more that you have pointed out stand out tremendously. There is an even bigger chance that there's people making Karr sound like Z so that they can keep the mystery going and have tracked Jack Terrence and his happenings throughout his final years. This kind of ties in with all parties knowing that law enforcement is involved. The loss of Karr's computers is no coincidence. I mean, why run from charges only to turn yourself in for something far larger like murder? This makes no apparent sense unless he knew he wasn't returning to the U.S. to face any real charges. Yeah, I don't see Karr being a technical person by any means, and the need to disclose such is simply overstating where there is no need, or he was being fed the know-how, just like the information in the Ramsey case. I did not read anything on Karr that included a deep knowledge of anything in the technical field with education or otherwise. He said he sent me a link. I think that you might like this article from a crime library, but this is now broken. So evidently this is something in regards to the Ramseys, but it was on truetv.com, but now you can't even get into this library or see whatever this communication was. So that's why I tell people, heed what you're reading and researching on the internet these days, because a lot of stuff has been torn down. Why? Everything else, they tell you, if you put a picture of yourself up there on the internet naked, it's going to be there forever, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's going to take it down for you. So these people are capable of getting things removed, and removed to the point where you're never going to be able to find it again, not even using the Wayback Machine.
So do you know who had this analysis?
This was Terry Batcher.
Oh, Terry. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So this is his I believe so he goes on to say, I find that it tells too much about the rampage taken against the Ramseys and how much of the evidence was strewn with falsehoods to get the scoop, and the police fed lies that promoted their stance on the suspects of interest. I noted that the article reminds everyone that Boulder had not seen a homicide that year and that law enforcement was uneducated in the aspect of proper procedure for such an event. I wonder if the ink in the Sharpie was ever tested to see if it was in fact the very same pen used. And with the information the perpetrators knew, it is possible that they purchased similar style notepads as the Ramsey used. I did not see where there was any indication that the paper carried impressions of writing from anyone in the house, but there were impressions and practice sheets from the suspect. This does not mean that the notepad came from the Ramsey home. The other theory that the intruder had at some point been in the Ramsey home to know such intimate details would also give the opportunity for the notepad to have been taken and brought back. Obviously, they took the cord and the duct tape they brought from the home, and that is probably because it could not be linked to the Ramseys. Duct tape is one of those messy tapes that pick up everything it lies on, and this would have had some trace evidence that could help to ID a perpetrator if it had been left behind, as well as the rope. Speaking of which, was DNA tested on the rope, and did they come up with anything? After all, with touch DNA these days, something should have been found unless the killer wore gloves, which would make the specialty knot even more complicated to perfectly complete. Again, I look at that knot, I just don't see it being special. No, it looks like a jumbled mess. He says, I read two different aspects of where the ransom note was found. One was on the staircase and the other was on the floor by the back door. So I'm not sure where it was actually found. I also read it was a baseball bat found in the yard where the children didn't usually play. So which is it again? Baseball bat or golf club? These kinds of things make it impossible for any member of the public to help solve a crime. I don't believe Jack Terrence had any intentions of squealing on his associates at all. I believe that he was every bit concerned for never getting the true recognition for what he got away with. While he points out many media entities throughout his communications, which include publishers, journalists, newspapers, authors, investigators, and movies, that does not have the events correctly. So, new theory: if you point suspicion towards something it isn't and portray a hatred for a particular group of people, i.e., media, law enforcement, where maybe there is none, in the end, Jack Terrence was well aware that no one was taking Dennis Kaufman serious, and he knew darn well who was covering him up and called out every single one of them in one way or another. This is what I skipped across, right? It basically like just sums up what I believe. I mean, and he got that take from those emails.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I skipped across while letting my research get away with me. I was reading that in 1997, Alex Hunter was the DA in Boulder, Colorado. This made me think of the gonzo faxes I received from someone on the internet. The letter is dated 10/28/97. They believe that Hunter Thompson had very similar writing to that of the Red Phantom Dear Marco letter. The letter reads with some consistency to that of Zodiac, and the little red heart on the arm screamed Jack Terrence, but I'm sure many men have a red heart tattoo. I think this is actually my writings now. So I'm now reverted back. That was the ending of Terry's. This is just notes that I was making on the end.
Yeah.
I initially looked at these documents and seen some comparable characteristics, but then I needed to recalibrate and realize that this is Hunter Thompson's natural handwriting, and the writing in the Dear Marco letter was disguised. Or was it? So I did some out-of-the-box research and found that Hunter Thompson was supposed to be dear friends with Ralph Steadman. So why does Hunter Thompson say these nasty, mean things to this man, right? Have you seen the gonzo faxes?
I have not, but Ralph Steadman was an artist from Great Britain, and they did the story on the Kentucky Derby together, and Steadman did the art.
Well, that backs up my research, which said they were friends. But if you read these
Thompson spent lots of time in the Bay Area because his main publisher, magazine-wise, was Rolling Stone magazine, which is based in San Francisco.
Okay. Well, then that backs up the research that I found that suggested that they were friends. Why would he write such a hateful letter? And I don't know that we've gotten to the gonzo faxes yet. Probably no, because we're in 1996 right now, and these letters were 1997. So we will be seeing the Hunter fax or the Hunter Thompson faxes for sure.
And Thompson did move to Colorado. I'm pretty sure it was Aspen. He actually ran for sheriff, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
And who was Hunter Thompson?
He was another famous writer, but he was mainly did nonfiction, and he did a lot of political writing. Fear and Loathing on the campaign trail, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
I have that in here. Yeah, so that makes it very odd that somebody who's an author then wants to run for law enforcement. I mean, I just feel like it's just such a tight-knit community between all of these. It's unbelievable. So I did write, why does Hunter Thompson say these nasty, mean things to the man who eventually completed Hunter Thompson's funeral arrangements? I did read another communication by Hunter Thompson, and he does seem to be a nasty individual to begin with. And if this is how he acts in business, then maybe this is how he acts towards everyone in his life, and was merely upset with Ralph at that moment when he wrote those gonzo faxes. What I made note of was the reference to pansexual, which I take to mean that all sex of any nature or any gender, maybe including children as well, wasn't off limits. And why would you say that about your friend? Ralph Steadman was a very weird individual by the looks of his art, but he made it big with this crap. That's what I had to say. So that tells me where there is a sick and twisted market for such things. Diving in a little further, I read that Hunter Thompson also worked for the San Francisco Examiner, and Ralph Steadman drew pictures for Alice in Wonderland, all of the movies and themes that we were seeing in the Zodiac stuff. Ralph Steadman also contributed to Johnny Depp's songs and worked on Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and Treasure Island. That research was all back from 2010 or so. So all of these things struck me as something Jack Terrence would have known and cherished, being such a huge book and movie buff that he was.
The other thing, real quick, about Thompson was he was really arrogant, and he pissed off a lot of people, and then he ended up supposedly killing himself with a gun.
Really?
Supposedly. But he did have a thing for guns.
And is that how he died, by gun?
Yes.
Not a shotgun, right?
No, I think it was a pistol to the head. I'm not positive, though.
Huh.
But they called it suicide.
Of course. Why and how, when people are so famous, do they do these things to themselves? I don't understand when you appear to have
Relatively
everything.
young. I think he was in his early 60s, about my age.
It's just so weird. I get it if you're like low poverty and don't have anything to look forward to, that you might consider taking your own life and you're feeling like life is over, but I just don't understand it when they're in positions like they are here.
Yeah. He
So I'm
always
trying
had
to
like beautiful women for girlfriends and wives, and
right.
he was pretty famous.
So I keep looking for where is the connection. I read at one point about the underground journalism occurring in the 60s, and we know, of course, that journalism has been corrupt since its inception by very powerful and rich owners such as Hearst, Murdoch, Maxwell, and many others. Journalism has also been corrupted by politics and law enforcement. Politics control what they can and can't say, while law enforcement sees fit to feed false information and leads to bolster their agenda against their suspects, such as the Ramseys, to the media and newspapers. If the mob is actually the owner of such media and newspapers, then maybe while they fulfilled an agenda against particular individuals, this also gave them a story to report on, or a book to write, or a movie to make. And of course, that means that they're making money off of it on top of it. I have never been able to shake the feeling that Hollywood is somehow responsible for the suppression of the truth in order to facilitate the money-making avenue that they've created. With that come ties to law enforcement, underground criminal activity, and others to assist in the misinformation given that has gotten us to the place we are today. Then we have the likes of Chris Wolf, who was a journalist, Michael Tracy, he's a journalism professor, Chris Pickle from CBS, which was originally Karr, owned by San Francisco newspaper owner, either the Examiner or Chronicle, but Tom Voigt's father was a journalist. John Walsh is an investigative journalism. Like, it just keeps tying itself right back around one another. I'm not sure where this is going at this point, but why not a group of eccentric journalists with sick and twisted agendas, both financial and political, with Jack Torrance or a group as a hired gun? Criminal connections galore and law enforcement at their fingertips. Wouldn't it be easy to make it look like a pedophile ring or place suspicion where it doesn't belong? And then I quoted, things are not what they seem, because that's something that the Zodiac did state.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be what you think it is.
Well, there are pedophile rings out there that are involved with organized crime and law enforcement.
100%. 100. Yeah, you have to be just like getting guns and drugs into the country. Somebody knows somebody. And
there's a lot of links between satanic organizations and pedophile rings.
Well, if like that Jasmine Noor, that had completed her little succinct podcast on how she believes that there's direct connectivity to the government and MK Ultra actually creating these cults. So just like creating the serial killer persona, they've created cult personas.
Well, there's a theory that MK Ultra was the Symbionese Liberation Army, based out of the Bay Area, the ones that kidnapped Patricia Hearst, that they were a MK Ultra deal.
I feel like that whole thing was rigged just as well.
There's
Patty Hearst.
Some of the same mind control experts were involved with Sin Q at Vacaville Prison and other places. And
nothing
started out in L.A. area.
Nothing stops her from being one of. Socialites were also a category of MK Ultra, and you would have placed Patty Hearst in a socialite standard, right? Because of how famous her father was, how rich and famous he was.
She was what they called an heiress.
Right. So she would have been a socialite. She would have been one of those people that would have been placed into that position either by choice. I want to say by choice.
Yeah.
Where they might have inducted people.
Was pretty progressive. She wasn't as conservative as her grandfather or father.
So if she's progressive and not conservative, the likelihood of her being brainwashed is probably a little less possible.
She was a little more susceptible to the brainwashing.
You think she was?
I think so.
Huh.
But they did torture her and brainwash her. They kept her in a closet. They did all kinds of wild things to her.
But do we know that for sure, or is that just the story we've been told?
Well, I wasn't there, so I can't say for sure. But
that's what I'm saying. None of us can.
Authority in the books I've read.
But if that's the narrative that they're feeding, that's the history and the precedents they're setting.
I don't know. A lot of this isn't been disclosed through mainstream media stories. These are well-researched investigative journalism books.
Oh, well, we were back to journalism. Once again, like I said, I love to do research and quote something off of the news. But then I tell you what, I'll be damned if I find out later that it's false. Right?
And the theory of the one book is that the MK Ultra used the Symbionese Liberation Army to help kill the progressive movement because it made them resort to violence and murder of random people and to support their quote unquote progressive agenda, like feeding poor and helping underprivileged youth and things like that. They did do those things, but they also murdered innocent people.
Well, so you're saying something that just rings a bell in my head, that both Patty Hearst was progressive and so was the Symbionese army, right?
Well, in theory, but no, they were a tool,
right?
They were a setup, and
that's what makes me question whether or not Patty Hearst
was to stop the progressive movement in California mainly, but also throughout the country.
And that's what makes me feel like that not only that was a big moneymaker for Hearst. Can you imagine the millions of newspaper it sold him just covering the story of his daughter being kidnapped? And yes, I'm doing air quotes. I just don't know whether I bought that she was really kidnapped or that wasn't an agenda that they created. Obviously, so that the result in the end benefited them no matter which direction it went.
So, like one of their demands was that Hearst put up the money to feed a bunch of poor children in Oakland and the Bay Area. San Francisco.
I saw that, and as well as he should. I mean, I don't know.
Right. So they did have certain things that they were doing that were progressive, but at the same time, they were doing all this wild other shit too.
Right.
And then the majority of them were killed in a shootout, which was more of an ambush and an attack in L.A. And they basically ended up blowing up the house, kind of like they did to David Koresh.
Wow. Again, another cult, right?
Yeah.
They create them and then they destroy them. Like I said, I've always felt that Hollywood will make and break you. You're either their favorite love child or you're their, worst enemy. And it dawns on me whenever I see somebody who was once famous and always in shows that now they're, playing the part of what is that? The general insurance. Like you get kicked to commercials.
That People's Temple started out in San Francisco too. And they actually had strong ties with Mayor Moscone.
Ooh. What is the People's Temple? Is that like Scientology?
Jim Jones in Guyana.
Oh, Jim Jones. Gotcha. Yeah, I'm not up on my cult stuff, but this gal here.
There's a great book about the history of San Francisco written by one of my favorite authors. And it discusses the SLO. It discusses Jim Jones, Moscone, Dan White, Twinkie defense guy that killed Moscone, and Harvey Milk.
Twinkie defense guy, what?
Yeah. He was on the board of supervisors with Harvey Milk, the really progressive, famous gay supervisor, and Moscone was the mayor at the time. And Dan White murdered Harvey Milk and Moscone, shot them both same day, and then got arrested or turned himself in or let himself get arrested. And then his lawyers used what was known as the Twinkie defense, that he had temporary insanity based on eating too many sweets.
Oh, dear Lord.
Yes.
I have never heard of that. That is hilarious.
Yeah, I got a book. I have the book I can loan it to you. It's called Season of the Witch by David Talbot.
Did he get off? Or
he got it, yeah. And then eventually later he killed himself.
Of course he did. Now we can start to see a thing. Like, so that in itself was probably set up and designed to get their agenda done, which was killing those two individuals, having a patsy who eventually gets off from it and then suicided because he probably knew too much. And again, you can keep a secret. Three people can keep a secret if two are dead, right?
Right.
Scary.
And that right around that time is when the AIDS epidemic hit.
Oh, yes. Hepatitis B shots, they said. Okay, well, this is kind of the end, and I'm going to save Lawrence Kane and the exculping of him till next week. So I want to thank everybody for having been here. I hope you had a wonderful Christmas. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you all next Friday. Thank you, Nolan, for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.